Welcome, everyone. So wonderful to have you at this very timely and important conversation. Before we do introductions, we want to really start first with our land acknowledgement. And so, Nicole, would you mind introducing yourself? And we'll get started from here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. And thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Nicole Garcia Diaz. I use she, her pronouns, and I currently work in the Office of Student Conduct. So for our land acknowledgement, every community owes its existence and strength to generations before them around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to migrate from their homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. We believe it's important to create a dialogue to honor those that have been historically and systemically disenfranchised. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere. We are on indigenous land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. We pay respects to the Piscataway elders and ancestors. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. We also have a link just for more information for those of you who are hoping to learn a bit more on the screen. Thank you. So at this point, thank you for reflecting with me for a moment. I want to talk to you all about the webinar features just so that we're all on the same page before we begin. So you'll notice you are automatically muted and your cameras are turned off. We have turned the chat off as well so we can focus on the Q&A feature. The wonderful Alex Franklin and I will be organizing questions for the Q&A portion towards the end of our time together. So please, as you have questions and thoughts that come up, feel free to put them into that chat feature. The session is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants in about a week. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Alex, also for helping us with all this chat and with the Q&A. Before we officially begin and start introducing ourselves with our panelists, first off, my name is Brian Medina. My pronouns are Z, here, and heres, and I'm the program manager for BISS Incident Support Services. But I did want to center us, so we did read and land acknowledgement, but just to acknowledge that is not enough, that rather than colonizing statements, rather than colonizing peoples in their lives, we want to also be in community. So being in community in this space is a start. Acknowledging the land that we have stolen, not stolen, but have been unceded, because for the Piscataway people, stealing or theft, this is not, there's not a possession to the land or to the water or to the honoring of the ancestry, but it's much more so about living the lives and honoring those ancestors in new ways, being in relationship with one another. And so I just want to note that as we talk about this very important topic around racial justice, that we're not replicating the same performative actions that maybe we could be seen as doing. And so being in relationship with Piscataway folks, I've had the fortune of working with them in recent weeks and months for us to advance some work here at University of Maryland. But again, we wanted to make sure we center here also with all the pain and trauma that we are experiencing in our world, for the AAPI community specifically, for Black lives, for other Indigenous communities that are experiencing continued trauma and stress and harm and death as a result of white supremacy, as a result of colonization, and result of so much harm done in this world. So again, I want to name that, acknowledging that in this space, we are here to honor one another, and our many great esteemed panelists are going to talk about their own experiences, but also important for us to name what it is that we're addressing and confronting. I want to invite my co-panelist and fellow comrade Suad, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you so much for such a beautiful introduction, Brian. So my name is Mohamud. I am a undergraduate senior, hopefully graduating in the spring, and I'm excited to help co-moderate this wonderful panel. And I definitely am really excited to hear from each of the panelists and learn more about how free speech and racial justice intertwine with each other. And so I'd like to dive us into our first question, panelists. So first, everyone, please go ahead and introduce yourselves and talk a bit about how your work intersects with free speech and racial justice.
I can start. My name is Gloria Aparicio Blackwell. I'm the director of the Office of Community Engagement under the Division of Administration. And I'm so pleased to be here today with all these wonderful panelists. So thank you for the invitation. The work that I've been doing here at the university have evolved. Came to the university in 1997 as a safety manager. So I was the safety person for the different employees dealing with the cleaning of the institution, the landscapers, the housekeepers, all the cookers that feed us, and all of those employees that require all this level of safety in the workplace. But then I realized how much I needed to evolve that work in addressing the issues of language barriers, the issues of understanding policies, the issues of understanding what rights, and some of them were not, some of the employees were not really certain what to ask. So in my case, I had to extend my portfolio to address conflict resolution, to address being the translator, the interpreter for those. And then I realized how much people have some misunderstanding of each other, because they don't understand because they speak other language or with an accent, or they didn't manage to speak English well. So those individuals were always in that kind of an interaction that was really difficult to address. So for me was to bring to their attention what they needed to do, what is the best way to understand the university process, at the same time talking to the leadership, how critical and important was to include this community to when we are developing plans and procedures and policies, that at the extent that they will be impacting them even more, and not having an advance here at these institutions. With that, I decided to change career, and then I came to be then to start dealing with the community at large, our neighboring communities. And for many years, the university tried to be connected more, but not as intentional as we would like to be. So I took the role to be just start meeting the people across the street, because we didn't have too much relationship. So that we learned that we have a robust African-American community, the Lakeland community in here in the city of College Park, that has a lot of history, and particularly the history of the urban renewal. You might be kind of know about that process that the federal government sometimes came into communities to address that a developed area and create some tension sometimes because they took the land away and the homes away with the eminent domain process. So all those things are happening across the street, and not so far distant, not too far away. It was in 1950, and even that community couldn't come here to the University of Maryland as a student, because University of Maryland was desegregated in the 1970s, so not too far away. So all those conversations have, for me, and the role that I play here, been here for 23 years, creating a sense of connections, of community, learning from our community, not us to tell them what is important for them, not us to use them as a research, for us to do a research, a lab, and then have those conversations and then forget it about them once we get accomplished what we needed to do. In this case, is to work together, in collaboration, to find solutions to whether it's a situation that they are dealing with, or there is some ideas that they would like to bring to their communities. And what a best way to get all the great minds together from the community and from the university.
Well, great. I can go next, although it's going to be so hard to follow you. That was incredible. I'm so excited to learn from you today. So my name is Salahuddin. I also use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Undergraduate Studies in Psychology. I'm also the Assistant Chair for Equity and Inclusion in Psychology. I have been here also for a long time, but not in a very different role as you. I was here as an undergraduate student, and then I came back as a doctoral student, and and then I came back as a faculty member. So I've been here for a long time in these roles in the department. And so my work intersects with racial justice and free speech in the sense that the courses that I teach, center racial justice. They're core topics in the classes that I teach. I also lead trainings and workshops related to racial justice and white supremacy in our department as a means of training our faculty, which and providing also for our students, but mostly for training our faculty and our staff on these really important issues, and working with our in our curriculum to be able to include more racial justice and anti-oppression, anti-racist work throughout our curriculum. I also work really closely with students, right? So really trying to understand and learn from students about what the needs are that are maybe not being met in our department, and being able to bring those to the faculty and the staff and be able to better meet those needs. So a variety of work around there. I also co-chair a committee that responds to incidents of bias in the department as well. So those are some of the major roles.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Anaya. I'm actually an undergraduate student here at the University of Maryland. And I'm also the city development reporter at the Diamondback, where I'm also on the equity committee, which definitely intersects with racial justice and free speech. If you guys haven't seen our coverage, we have tried to expand it a lot. And another thing that I've been doing at the Diamondback is recently translating some of our articles into Spanish so that more people in our university community in the greater College Park area can read our news. And I also like to think that we're kind of challenging the status quo in college journalism. That's just my opinion and perspective, but I like to think of it that way.
And good afternoon. I'm Vanessa Taft. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Conduct. I've been working in the Office of Student Conduct for about 8 years now, 5 as the Assistant Director, and I primarily oversee non-academic misconduct that occurs on and around campus, not inside the residence halls. And so my work intersects with free speech and racial justice in a variety of ways, but primarily, our office receives and reviews reports of student misconduct, which may include allegations of behavior or speech motivated by bias, classroom disruptions, protests, different things around campus. And so our role obviously is to hold students accountable for their actions and be able to provide educational opportunities for them to learn from their decisions and potentially repair harm amongst the community where appropriate. We do a lot of work with our campus partners in collaboration to make sure that the needs of the community are met, and to make sure that we are providing educational resources and support, not only to the students who are coming through our office, but also to the greater community. And that includes faculty and staff who may be working through different issues in working with students in the community.
Thank you one and all for sharing your experiences, your introductions, and how your work intersects with free speech and racial justice.
So we have a question. So last summer, Black student leaders prioritized critical demands and goals for UMD, including holding those accountable for bias incidents. In your roles, how might you hold individuals accountable for harm while honoring free speech?
Okay. Okay, so something that the Equity Committee did last year is we reached out to culture groups on campus, and we set up meetings with them to discuss the stories that we've missed in the past and how we can better serve those populations in the future. I think I spoke with the president of Plumas, who couldn't give me exact stories that we missed just because it was so on the spot, but we were able to speak more about their objectives and things that we could cover in the future, which was extremely productive. And it kind of helps us become more accountable, because we also need to make sure that we're serving our populations and not just putting out the stories that we see around us, but also those that we have to dig a little for.
Thank you so much for Anaya, especially for naming that the labor of our Black students being put into this in some ways is exploitative, that it should have been and should continue to be up to all of us, and certainly as administrators and staff and faculty, rather than expecting that our Black student leaders should be taking this charge. But I am grateful for you and for the many other Black student leaders on our campus for taking charge as you have, in order for us to hold ourselves accountable and giving us really the guideposts and our accountability for ourselves. So again, I appreciate you and appreciate all the work that has been done in this project and beyond. How do we continue to track that? I invite you, Vanessa, as somebody who worked with student conduct, how do we talk about accountability? Again, it's the same question.
It's a great question. And I think our office is often charged, obviously, with that. We have to distinctly balance free speech and accountability. And the one thing I always say about free speech is that speech is not free of consequence. And so while it may be protected under the law, you may be free from government action, which we are, as a state institution, are a part of that. It does not mean that accountability and consequence can't occur. So a lot of times I think we hear that, when students engage in hateful language, and really bias related, posts and things on social media, our office gets a lot of those reports. And our primary goal is to be an office that educates those individuals about how their actions, how their words have an impact on the community and the people around them, and how they may not intend to directly harm people, but that their intentionality, doesn't necessarily negate the impact that it does have. So really about, focusing in on how do we educate students about that harm? How do we change their minds and their behavior? How do we change their way of thinking about something? And that's through education and development. So it doesn't always look like banishing somebody from the community. Oftentimes it looks like engaging them further and more deeply in the community, and forcing them to do the work, forcing them to research and read and talk to people, and providing them educational opportunities to do that. So we're very intentional about how we work with students to do that. Sometimes our office is not the appropriate place to have those conversations, because there is a sense when we're talking about free speech that student discipline can have sort of a chilling effect on free speech. And so we have to honor that as well. And so again, it's a big balancing act that we have to do. We don't always like it as conduct professionals. We feel very equipped and able to have difficult conversations with students without it being necessarily a disciplinary matter, especially as it pertains to free speech. But we know when something doesn't necessarily belong in our office. And so we will engage with our campus partners to make sure that that individual is being, educated and supported through this kind of situation. So we may refer them to, to the BISS office. We may refer them to somebody in student affairs. We may refer, coach faculty members and working through those matters with students to make sure that, again, that immediate community that was impacted has resolution, that has, that there is accountability within that community. So it's really our role to kind of make sure we figure out, is there an action that might be disciplinary, and then if not, how do we best address this student and this issue? And because obviously we can't just let things go. This is their behavior and their words matter. So really trying to make sure that accountability looks appropriate for what is being brought forward.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for describing the various layers and complexity of this, acknowledging that accountability is not just in a punitive or kind of carceral way, but it very much can be an educational way, so long as we are preventing further harm, and even acknowledging the current harm, restoring one's efforts to the community, because we don't want continued harm created within individuals or larger community and groups. Naz, I'd be interested in hearing your perspective, particularly in a faculty role, working as you have with a lot of groups around racial justice, thinking about that from a different lens.
I mean, I guess one thing I'll add is we are thinking about accountability among our faculty. So we've been focusing a lot on, and this has come from students, right? So students we do a multicultural climate survey where we're asking students every year to, just about their, and not just students, staff and faculty, about their experiences in the department. And then we have an annual town hall where we have conversations with undergraduate students as well about how to improve what we're doing and also assess the progress that we've made in the past year. And, our students have been very clear that our faculty that we all need more training, right? We all need more training. And so we've been trying to offer more training for our faculty and also really hold faculty accountable for participating in this training. So we're really trying to change our culture where the expectation is that we are going to, in all of the work that we do, whether it's our interactions with each other, our interactions with students, our curriculum, our research, all of it, that we are coming from this anti-oppressive space and really trying to create this culture. And so we've put together a series of trainings that happen often during faculty meeting times, which folks are expected to attend. And when if people don't come regularly, then the chair will follow up, and and there will be some conversations about what's happening here. This is an expectation that this is something we're going to do now in the department. So that's one piece. And then, well, I guess I'll just leave it with that for now. So we've been really focusing on the faculty because it's going to be really difficult, I think, to do what we want to do in the classroom environment or in other spaces when the faculty are not well versed in how to handle it. And either to make sure that we're behaving in the way that we should be behaving, but also not knowing how to navigate any incidents that might come up with students in the class as well.
Thank you so much, Naz. And just a nod to our faculty affairs colleagues that are managing this and kind of leaning on them and their expertise. There are policies and procedures for faculty that are saying or doing things that are inappropriate. There are evaluation pieces. And for some folks, it feels like not enough. Acknowledge that. But then how do we then push that needle further, knowing what we already have in place around our policies, the expectations that are in place, but then how do we coach people toward what we expect as an institution through our values? So thank you, Naz, and talking about the faculty end. I wanted to wrap up a little bit this question with you, Gloria. You've already said a bit in your introduction about your relationship with local community members, thinking about this not just from a university campus lens, but how the impact more broadly as we talk about accountability, racial justice, free speech, and talking about particularly the Black student demands. How does this implicate our Prince George's County relationships, our College Park relationships, acknowledging that the harm ripples beyond just us?
Exactly. And we also had to see that a lot of our students live in the community. How are they going to behave? How are they going to have the relationship? As a matter of fact, I'm going to mention something that we have. They had a discussion last year in terms about race relation. The city put this virtual town hall together, and many of our professors from the African American studies and also from behavioral science were panelists. And there was a Zoom bombing situation, and it was derogatory namings, and it was, I was perplexed, but we were prepared that may happen. And I'm going to paraphrase here from Dr. Opara. She came to one of the presentations last I think it was early this year or last year. She's the provost of the University of San Francisco, and she said that sometimes you don't want to pay, you kind of deal with the Zoom bombing, take those away right away, but do not take the distraction about the conversation. And we were talking about race relations, how critical is a hard conversation, and people sometimes do everything to deter from that. From the student standpoint of view, we had a case from a student. She was Latina, and a professor that was not from the university was doing this mock trial and was selecting the students. Inadvertently, he was talking to the person making the selection, and she mentioned, well, there are these 3 students that can make the diversity cut for our group, but those 3, this one, she's kind of like so lame and is mediocre. But we need to have the diversity in place. So I think we're going to take it, but she might be too busy because she seemed like she's doing a lot of social justice out there. It went out. Of course, it went into the Washington Post, that shaming the professor and all that. But what we did in that point is bring our resources together. We came as a unity, as a community, to support the student, because sometimes they don't know what to do. They feel completely deflated. They feel that this is going to be the last thing that could ever happen to them. And for us to demonstrate that that's not the case, that in this case, I always tell people, if they are not really prepared, please tell them, or also find out why not. Why are they they don't have the same footing as everybody else? What is the school system that they came in? And if I have something to do, I can go back and then start working with those systems that can really prepare our students to be at the same level as everybody else. But that's not what we deal sometimes today.
Thank you so much, Gloria, on those insights and for actually providing a constructive example of what to do when placed in a situation where hate speech and xenophobia is present. And I think it's a great transition into the discussion of what would happen if there was a general scenario. And before I dive into the scenario, I'd really like to give a shout out to all of the panelists for the different ways that they've been mentioning the importance of research and making sure that everyone's taking the opportunity and the time to lean into finding some resources to educate yourself and make sure that, and this education is important on the stance as ranging from student to faculty and beyond, and the importance of making structural changes and making sure that this application is actually being performed from a structural level and not limited to theoretical like conversations and opening dialogue. And so I'd love to dive into our scenario. So as everyone comes from so many different types of backgrounds, I'm generally curious if each of you could walk us through your process if the following hypothetical situation took place. And the situation is a student reports to you that someone they think is a student has been posting xenophobic and racist messages on your department, group, or class GroupMe, and it has now been shared on another social media. The student wants you to advocate for UMD to do something about their posts.
Well, I will say that I have seen one of the places that people immediately will go to will be for the University of Maryland campus police, UMPD, the police department. The other one is the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. For those who are not feeling comfortable to go into the police, they will be going to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Of course, the Student Affairs has so many great groups and programs within units within the student affairs that assist immediately in those regards. OMSI, New Borough. So those are the places where people feel comfortable. And of course, there are some that just feel calling their friends and go from that and just leave it like that. We're hoping that people uses those mechanisms so we can address and they can be dealt with, and hopefully we'll get a good end result.
What we tend to do is we tend to quickly contact Brian and talk to Brian and get advice about how to proceed. So that is honestly what we would probably do. I think we would, in that kind of, I mean, after doing some assessment, I mean, I can imagine that we would, our leadership tends to put out a statement, right? Like with our values and condemning what's been done. So that usually includes our chair, our assistant chairs, all of our leadership, you know, on behalf of the department. And so again, we have that rapid response committee. And so our committee comes together. We, you know, we recognize what's happening. We usually write a statement, but we also agree to what we're going to actually do, right? So again, that might come with talking to Brian and really being able to consult with whoever the relevant others are on campus before we decide what needs to happen. If that includes adding, again, some more trainings, what does accountability look like, you know? So I think depending on the specifics of that scenario, we would try to address the harm, make a blanket statement about hopefully specifically what our values are and condemning whatever has been said, and then try to engage in some kind of education and accountability around what's occurred. But again, I think the specifics would really matter, and Brian's consultation.
I guess I'll talk about the icky part of this. And anybody that knows me, I'm a little more, I guess I'm kind of tell it like it is, but For this situation, you know, context matters. Obviously, when we get a report, our first instinct and our first kind of call to action is to connect with our campus partners, right? We're exchanging with Brian's office. You know, we're talking with the relevant faculty. We're talking with the students who have reported it or the individuals who have reported the incident to kind of understand the impact and the harm caused, and making sure that we're directing them to the appropriate resources. Our office typically works with, you know, strategic communications or with the Division of Student Affairs to put out some kind of message, right, that acknowledges that we've received the report and, you know, here's our next steps, or here's, you know, some resources for you in the community. And then our work sort of sits with the evaluating whether or not this constitutes free speech. And so that is the icky part, because in a lot of ways, it often is. That doesn't mean that every situation is. Every message that comes through, every report that comes through is unique and has unique context and has different information about it. That is important for us to know, which is why we talk to all of those impacted folks, because it's important for us to understand, did this happen in the course of a classroom discussion or a classroom discussion board? Is this simply a GroupMe that other students have created? Is this something that primarily has been posted on a student's individual social media? And so where it's posted, you know, what type of language they're using, how it impacts the community, how it's impacting the classroom and the learning experience are all really relevant in how we determine whether or not this is free speech. Are there threatening words, right? So people can say really hateful and harmful things, but are they making direct threats? Are they intimidating others through their language? And so those are all really carefully evaluated and looked at. Sometimes our office has to connect with the Office of General Counsel, which is our university lawyers, because they are the legal analysts. They are the ones that know the law. As much as I'm in it, I'm not a lawyer. And so often I will kick it over to them and say, thoughts? What do you all think? Is this free speech, or is this something actionable that my office can move forward with? And so we will follow their typical advice and information based on their legal expertise. So if it is truly actionable conduct, then our office will proceed with meeting with the student and following our normal student conduct process. If it is not actionable conduct and it is maybe more of a free speech issue, we would likely connect with other campus partners, potentially somebody in the Vice President for Student Affairs' office, to potentially meet with the student and have a more educational conversation to help them understand that harm and that impact from their statements. So doesn't feel great all the time from our perspective, because we would love to take action. But again, that accountability and that consequence looks different for every situation. So it's important for us to balance all of those things.
And I completely agree that context really matters in the situation in and of itself, but because in this case, it could easily turn into, like in my case, a larger coverage of inclusion in classrooms, but it really does depend on the specific language that is said in the targeted populations and the impacts of the language, unfortunately.
I'll just also add real quick. The other thing that we tend to do is we might also talk to our faculty about how they might engage in the conversations in their classrooms about the thing that has just occurred, right? And so if it's something that does impact our student body as a whole, we do often encourage faculty who do feel like they're equipped to have these conversations and help direct them on how they might do something like that, so that people have spaces to process this. And sometimes we also might do something like the town hall, or what we call our community unity events, where we can bring our folks who are interested together to again talk about what's happened and kind of move forward together from there.
So there's a question in the chat that seems very relevant, and maybe particularly for you, Vanessa, and talking about jurisdiction and how our policies are framed. And so the question is asked, so if it was posted, if this specific scenario, if it was posted on a platform that has nothing to do with the university, can it not go through a university process? Could you speak a little bit to that as well, Vanessa?
It depends. Again, not the icky answer, right? It depends. Again, we have to look at specific conduct or behavior that might be accompanying the language. And so if it's just making statements, not just, but if it's making statements that are hateful, and hurtful, or if it is some other expression of free speech, right? Because language is not the only form of free expression. Art, all different forms of art and journalism and everything are considered part of free speech. But if there is actionable conduct, again, maybe they made threats to a direct community or something in their statements, then that might be actionable, even if it's on somebody's individual personal social media account or something of that nature. But if it falls under that free speech bubble, we may not be able to take action. And again, that might be where we redirect the over to somebody who can have an educational conversation, help bring light to what the student has posted on their site and help them understand the impact. And I will say that a lot of times those conversations are so tremendously valuable. When those students are called out by a staff member to say, like, you can say what you have the legal right to say it, but here's how that's hurtful, right? Here's how this looks for you. Here's how this affects our community. Here's how this affects you in the long term for employers looking at you. Here's all of the unintended consequences of you making these blanket statements on your personal page. And while you may be permitted to do it, it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't really bode well for you. So we're able to kind of call it out in that way.
So I have a quick question then. So when do we get the police involved, or we don't? Because I was under the impression that that was something that we needed to alert them in case is something that is it could impact even to the bigger camp, to the campus in general.
It's a great question, Gloria. I was going to follow up on that piece regardless, that in terms of these type of situations, they do layer with many different partners. And so some of this is, as Vanessa and others have described, the details matter. Is this targeted? Is it not? Is it considered something that may be a precursor to a hate crime, in which case the police may be involved? I will say, broadly speaking, 90 to 95% of these situations don't involve the police. It either isn't relevant to the police, it's not a crime, or the person who's reporting this is not seeking after their resources. They're looking for other supports, whether it is through a procedural policy-oriented, a faculty-oriented support, or through bias instant support services to see that the trauma-informed, the naming the harm, acknowledging it as that harmful speech and that trauma that's affected them, is less so about them trying to have a report that could in fact re-traumatize them, that they go back into being asked questions. And it very much could be that they're not interested for lots of reasons, maybe based on their identities, based on where they want to move forward in terms of an outcome, not to involve the police. So I just named that there are these variety of options. Every person in this space with me, we've had these kind of conversations for individual situations like this. However, it's really premised, in my opinion, on who it is that's reporting what is their desired outcome, rather than us forcing a process that then may harm them further or harm their friends and family members and community members that in fact are seeing this as well. Because this is not just a singular one-for-one where maybe is on their dry erase board in residence hall. If this is global, the ripple effect is far beyond that. So again, thank you, Gloria. That is, I'm not a panelist, but just clarifying the process for us as we move forward with any of these situations that come about.
Yeah, and I will add that when free speech crosses the line into a threat, we're almost always looping in the police because we do have to do that threat assessment. And so our office is, we have representatives that serve on the behavior evaluation threat assessment team. I'm actually one of the people on that team right now. And so we work directly with the police to evaluate those threats and make sure that appropriate steps are taken when necessary.
So I'd like to take us back to the concept of what structural change will look like when it comes to addressing free speech and racial justice. And so I actually wanted to ask a question in relation to my position as an undergraduate student and genuinely want to understand that if students were able and interested in changing policy, what steps are available to students to be able to perform such a change, and just more of understanding of how this process would go. And specifically, as someone who comes from a marginalized community, how can cultural groups on campus be incorporated in this policy creation and change step? So taking a look at the opportunity to create policy from a proactive standpoint, but also making sure that we are keeping students in the loop and seeing what their position is in policy creation.
Did you want to go?
I mean, I can say from, so from where I'm sitting, right? So the departmental perspective in the Department of Psychology, right? So our students, like just last week, did a letter writing campaign because they wanted to add a class related to Asian American studies. I mean, we had it, but they wanted it offered more often. So, and that kind of thing in our department does work. It tends to be very effective. So basically, I think students raising their voices together in the same way that we just saw, with Black student leaders, like students raising their voices together, in my experience where I sit, has been really effective. And so, it seems to get the attention of, people who make these decisions. And again, we can engage in conversation about what it is that's needed and why it's needed. And, so in this case, with this letter writing campaign, it was successful. The course is now being offered. That change was we were able to make that change. Also, again, like I was saying before, with students saying that we need more again, that's not policy. Well, it's not policy, but it did actually change the way that we do things in our department. So, holding faculty accountable to attend these trainings and making them mandatory, right? Well, we can't actually force somebody to go and sit in the room. There are consequences for them not attending now, right? And so that is something that's come from students raising their voices too. So I think, from a departmental perspective, coming together with other students and being able to raise that to your director of undergraduate studies or to the chair of your department. Sometimes people don't know who to talk to. Those are the people to talk to in the department, but also perhaps taking it to your assistant dean in your college of undergraduate studies, right? So that's another person who's a point of contact who can also be a powerful person to take concerns to. But I think being able to do that, it often is really heard, I think.
Yeah, I was going to talk, I think that's, Naz, you really bring up a good point about creating the structural change within your own departments and your own, space to make it more accessible for people to create change in policies. So I think for students, the one thing I think about is understanding how policy at a large public institution works, right? And that requires research and understanding. So for any university policy, right, those have to get approved and pushed through the university senate. And the senate is a body that's made up of a multitude of members of the university community, faculty, staff, students, ex officio members, everybody, like all these folks. And so they are really supposed to be representative of the campus as a whole, but those policies and creations go through proposals to the university senate. And so the one thing I would say is that this is awesome. Thank you, Nicole, for posting how to submit a proposal to the university senate. And so there is a process by which you get policy reviewed and approved. I would also say that if you're trying to change existing policy, is to understand where that policy is housed, because you want to first talk with the people who oversee those policies to make sure you're not doubling your efforts, right? To make sure that you're working in a collaborative way with those folks to create change. Because a lot of times, I can speak from a student conduct policy, like obviously the Code of Academic Integrity, Code of Student Conduct. We're involved in a lot of different policies on campus, but it's really important to have student voice. But it's also important for students to understand historical context around policies, to understand legalities, to understand how these policies came to fruition and how they are executed in order to create effective change. I know that I, as a staff member, have to do my own personal work to make sure that when I'm doing, reviews of our code every couple of years, that I am doing so from different lenses, right? Sometimes I may have one thing in mind in changing the policy. Years ago, we expanded to include off-campus behavior by our students. Then a couple years later, we wanted to change our overhaul and make our policy less legalistic. And now we're moving towards trying to figure out how do we implement more restorative practices in our policy? How do we change the language even further to make sure that it's inclusive, to make sure that it's intentional and accessible to all of our students, and to make sure that it's not leaving anybody out in the process. And so we're really, as staff members, having to do that work in education in our professional circles to make sure that we're addressing those pieces of the puzzle. So I think for creating change and creating policies policies, understanding how that works, and then tapping the right folks to be collaborative to do that, because you don't want to be bumping up against a department. You want to be working together to create that change, because they will likely have the capital in the campus to push those things through and be able to advocate for you for those changes in the room when those decisions are being made. So really collaborating with staff, I think, and faculty would be huge.
And Vanessa, you're completely right about this. And one thing I'm going to tell you too, you have to be involved. It takes work. To eliminate or to reduce structural racism, we have to be sitting at the table, meaning people that look different for the ones that are making the decisions. And if we're not sitting at the table, they can come up with all these decisions because they don't have those lenses that are looking from different perspective. And we are craving every time for the University Senate to get students to be part of the process, to get involved. It takes time. We understand that we take time. But why is that only the other majority or whatever the population is that is representing right now that doesn't look like us have the time and we're not? I sit in a lot of, I'm going to be talking in my opinion, I sit in a lot of committees that people keep telling me, Gloria, why are you stretching yourself too thin? I said, listen, I'm encouraging others to attend, but they are not able to. I'm going to do everything possible to bring those issues that people are not looking at. Every time that I go, I wait until the last minute to address the issues of the immigrant community. Then people tell me, Gloria, are you only the one single-minded individual talking about the immigrant community? Well, guess what? I happen to be one immigrant. I happen to be Latina. I happen to be speaking another language. I learned at the age of 22. So now you know why I have this accent. But that is something that I need to bring to the table. But if we don't have people to put the time, faculty, staff, students that don't look at the makeup of the leadership, is going to be an issue. People are saying they don't give us the chance. Well, if we all fight for that chance to be sitting at the table, then the conversation could be different.
Thank you so much for sharing that information, Vanessa and Gloria. I actually wanted to echo a point from the student perspective, and from my own personal experiences trying to reach out to faculty and people who are in charge of creating policy on campus and are in higher positions on campus. I've noticed there's been a lot of backlash and struggles to essentially bridge the gap between the student voice and the structural and administrative voice. And so from the students' perspective, I feel like we generally don't really get that visibility from the inside. And as a result, we don't typically see opportunities for us to voice our concerns and our experiences. I actually didn't know about writing the proposal, but I did want to challenge the space here and talk a bit about, wanted to question what are some other opportunities and alternatives for students to interact with administration, with policy creation outside of the proposal? Because again, the proposal itself is, it's an important tool to be able to push about long-term change, but it's a question about accessibility and whether students will be able to voice their concerns in time. As a graduating senior, I have a lot of different ideas and concerns that I have, but since I'll be graduating in actually about a bit like less than 2 months, if I want to make that change, there isn't enough time for me to do that. So what can we do as students informally, from not taking the approach of the UMD Senate, to voice our concerns and establish these relationships? I feel like it's very important for us to be able to establish said relationships so that we can even make it to the table, because sometimes it's hard enough to make it to the table. And I'd actually like to tie this to a live question from the audience that says, often the structures we want to change include oppression by staff or faculty. What should students do when faculty and staff aren't willing to work with us or are continuing to oppress student voices? And I really wanted to echo this question because this is some backlash that I faced at my time here at UMD.
Well, okay, so I'm trying to think. First of all, I think what Gloria said is really important. So getting involved, I do think is really important, right? And I think when I was saying before about being able to make some changes, you know, our students in our department, for example, making those changes, the students who led that did understand how to do that because they had been involved in other things. And so you mentioned the Senate, Vanessa. I mean, one of the students is involved in the Senate, you know, they're involved as teaching assistants, or they're involved on, you know, our committees and things like that. And so, and also, so that is part of how understanding how it works, and then who to kind of talk to and how to move this forward. So they were then able to, so, you know, work with other students who may be less involved, but help bring their voice to the table as well. We also, again, just using this as an example, one of the students who kind of led this was also somebody who had graduated. So they too, like you, had left, but then still wanted to see this change, and then worked with this other student who was there still and kind of had the seat at the table, you know? And so it does require connecting and working with other people and getting sort of that knowledge about how things work. So that's number one. But the other piece that you asked about is, I mean, it is hard. And I feel, you know, it is disappointing to hear that you have experienced this pushback. Of course, it's not surprising, and it's disappointing that you've had this pushback when you've tried to raise your voice about things that are happening from faculty and staff. If that faculty and staff person does not hear you, right? Like, it is important to then, again, like the director of undergraduate studies of every department is a place to go. If that person, you know, there's also, like I said, the deans, and there's also ODI, right? And so I know that Brian has, you know, played that role for people in the past as well, who have felt, who have experienced, unfortunately, bias through other faculty and staff and have not been able to have that addressed, right? And so there are other folks on campus like that who might be able to help with that. But I mean, I know it's really hard work, and I wish that this is not something that you had to take on. And, you know, if you have the capacity to do it, it's so important to put that out there, because it really does need to be addressed. You know?
And I would almost echo, like, taking on a proposal to the University Senate is, as we've all heard, like, labor intensive. When we did our Code of Student Conduct changes, it took 1.5 years to get those changes through. And that's from a staff perspective. That it took me 1.5 years to get that through with my team. And so I don't expect, like, I can acknowledge that for a student, you're probably not going to latch on for the 1.5 years, right? Like, you're graduating, right, in 5 short weeks, or however, is it 5 weeks now? And so aside from submitting a formal proposal, like I said, like, if you're seeing a policy or something on campus that's not right, then scheduling meetings with staff who will hear you, right? Like, you can anytime schedule a meeting with myself or my team, and we will always hear from students about what their concerns are, whether that be through an email and just, you know, keep emailing, right? Like, you know, typically we hear repetition, right? It's a simple copy and paste. I'm going to repost my email that I sent you 2 weeks ago that you've not responded to. And then maybe additionally, like, copying somebody else within the department. There's tactics that you all, that can be utilized to gain traction. But really, yes, leaning on the people that you do know within your academic spheres, within your student involvement spheres, to identify who are the people that I need to talk to. And if I'm not getting anywhere with those people, then where else do I go? But I will tell you that from a conduct perspective, like, I may miss a first email, or I may be embroiled in 900 cases during a COVID pandemic, but usually a second email coming through our inbox, they're going to go, Vanessa, hey, did you respond to this? And I'm going to go, oh no, I didn't. Let me go ahead and do that. And so for most of us, that responsiveness, sometimes we might miss the first email, but a second email usually gets attention. The other piece, I will say that the Division of Student Affairs, and Dr. Perillo has been very clear in that she wanted to create a Dean of Students position, which the university has not had. And a Dean of Students position has a lot of support for students outside of the academic spheres. And so really being able to leverage, hopefully, that position in that office to be able to help streamline support for students who are trying to make change and who are trying to, you know, raise their voices in those ways. And that office being able to identify problems that exist for students so that we can continue to take corrective action. So I think that committing the resources to create those changes and to help students create those changes is really important from an institutional level.
So this question is very touchy for me just because I am a student who has received a fair amount of backlash for advocating for myself. But the one thing that I would like everyone to take away, I guess, is that for students anyway, is that you have to advocate for yourself just because the people that come after you, as much as it sucks, sometimes we fear backlash or retaliation or just being dismissed. But at the end of the day, if one person speaks up, that might encourage other people to speak up as well. And I would hate for anyone to be in a situation where it's like, you're the only one who has ever complained about this. So is this really as significant as you're saying? So that's one point, but also the fact that sometimes like we have to try our avenues. If one person doesn't work, then we really have to speak our truth to someone else, just because there's always going to be, like, once we get to the end of the road, there's going to be someone who's going to say, they said what to you? They did what? Like, please tell me again what happened so I can grasp this. Even if one person dismisses you, that doesn't mean that you should stop. That means that you should go harder just because you need someone to listen to you and who can advocate for you efficiently. Yeah, like I said before, I have experienced backlash before, and what I did, I cried for a little bit, and then I, figured out, what do I need to do? What should my next steps be? Because if I'm experiencing this, then I know that a lot of other students are. And even though there are a lot of formal structures that do kind of continue to make it hard for us to kind of advocate for ourselves, if we do reach out to the people like the Dean of Undergraduate Studies and Department and stuff, they can sometimes speak to someone informally just to have a conversation so that other people can understand the impact of, maybe a class policy or something else that is causing a problem.
Before we go on to another question, I just want to center you, Anaya and Suad, for bringing this and raising this. The pain and the trauma has been shared, not just by you, but many others to me in our office, about the struggles of trying to navigate the power, the privilege of folks in senior positions or even middle positions, and not understanding what it is, why it is that it's so laborious and so exploitative of our Black and Brown and Indigenous communities to expect that they have to continue to try and try again and force in different avenues and navigate this very complex web. So again, I just want to name for the both of you and hold you in this space, appreciating you for speaking truth to power and acknowledging that this is very difficult. At the same time that it requires then of us, even more so as staff, as faculty, to take a step up beyond what we can maybe just do in our small communities, but to make a ripple effect for sustained change. So again, thank you both. We did have a question in the chat that I think alludes to a few things that we've already been talking around education. And so they write, education seems to be a common theme in the approach to addressing hate bias on campus. Are there campus-wide plans for coursework for incoming students or training presented at new faculty and staff orientations? Thank you, Amy, for sharing that question. Maybe particularly because it relates to some faculty components. Naz, would you like to take that? Maybe we touch base on others related to more orientation-oriented piece.
So this is about training for all faculty as they come in?
Yes, training for, it says about training for presenting faculty and staff orientations, but also for incoming students. So we'll get to the student component in a moment, but maybe I thought you could talk about how faculty might be trained in your unit.
So, I mean, we don't have specific training for kind of onboarding faculty, I would say, right? So faculty come in and I don't know, part of their process, like interview process and all of that does include having them sort of think through some of these issues, but we don't have any special training for faculty to onboard faculty really at all in any capacity, which probably isn't a great thing. But with regard to this, I mean, it's sort of, at this point, it's really just what we have right now. So we have we have once a month, we have trainings and workshops related specifically to, right now, anti-racism mostly in our department. And so again, faculty are expected to attend those. In addition to that, like I said, we have trainings related to incorporating anti-racism into our curriculum. And so those faculty expected to come to too, but there's not anything specifically for new faculty at this point.
Brian, I can mention something about that. The university had a new employee orientation that they do it, I believe is once or twice a month. And we have a seat at that presentation where we talk about the work that we're doing with the surrounding community. I used to get a lot of calls when people wanted to do research or projects or community engagement in West Virginia and New Jersey, which is nice. But I said, we have what you are thinking about to have collaborations across the street. So that gave us the opportunity to talk about what the chances are for them to be considering and who's our community. And also the faculty staff affair, they also do another orientation for onboarding for new faculty. So that's another place that we talk about this work that in terms of engaging with the school system. One of the demands from the students is how much we're doing with Prince George's schools and how are we investing time, not only the students, but also the faculty and staff to be part of this collaboration. As you know, that if communities and the schools are not having the strong resources for them to really get a good foundation, because this university is becoming very hard to get in. I got in when it was easy. This was like the last resort. So I came here, graduated. Now I feel like a privilege about that. I had that moment that I can get in, but right now it's difficult. So if this difficult, what is it that this institution can do to really provide the option? Because I'm going to say, no, many people will say, no, everybody's for college. Well, I'm not saying I know everybody's for college. Here is a variety of options that you have, and we're going to be providing the support that you need. So in this case, it's just for the faculty to understand what the relationship is, that we want to make sure that we're not using the community as a lab, as I mentioned before. It is more about that we want to build relationship. We wanted to see how what we're learning, what we're trying to put in, what we have here in theory that we wanted to put in practice. How does it work for affected individuals or communities that we're dealing with? And having this mutually beneficial, because what the community used to say to us is, they're coming here, they do the study, they get the research, get in the book, and then poof, be gone. What I'm asking them, could we do the research, do whatever the conversation is, but come be connected with this. What happened after that? What were the findings, and how can they help them to better their life, to move to the next step if that comes to be the case?
Thank you, Gloria. And of course, thank you for recentering us in. This is also community-wide impact. And for those high school students or middle school students who are thinking about becoming involved as a UMD student someday, that training and that orientation, it well precedes them actually being in a class. And so thinking about this from a holistic perspective, rather than thinking about it the day that somebody shows up as a faculty member or as a new student, means that that's the first exposure to what it is that we value and what are our expectations. So again, I just named that there are some initiatives. They're still in the seedling phase in terms of the Terrapin Strong, and a lot of orientation for the whole campus to share in our values, to go back to understanding our rootedness as, in some ways, the also white supremacy rootedness. To try and dismantle that, we need to actually understand our context. We need to honor Lieutenant Richard Collins III, for instance, as a means for us to say, we named it, the trauma has been in our own community, in order for folks coming in to have an honest depiction of who we are and what we have encountered as a community. And so appreciate you again, Gloria and Naz, sharing about the kind of faculty, but also the orientation being before that. I wanted to shift a little bit and invite Suad to share additional questions. But before I do, is even just from my own experience within being a new staff member about a year ago, that orientation is, very preliminary. It is very much of just kind of baseline. What do I need to know to get my timesheets? What I need to know to be able to make sure my access to the internet is okay, my email. But that, how do we advance that beyond? Some of this requires our own departments, even if at a larger school area or larger campus area, we don't have everything, that how do we then ensure that various communities get that specialized support? Because it may look different from a faculty member advising somebody who's brand new or maybe a postdoc, different than in our units in ODI. The orientation may look slightly different. So I just want to name that. How do we incorporate the bigger picture, but also on the departmental or unit area, how to make sure that as an infrastructure we provide that. And for students, somebody who is coming into the residence hall, they may look like a different experience in their orientation and their transition than somebody who is staying at home and transitioning back into from campus. That experience might look different, and so their orientation might also. But nonetheless, having a baseline would be important for all of us. Suad, did you want to carry us on to the next question?
Yes, I actually think this ties deeply into what kind of opportunities and ways that we as a campus can expand support for other marginalized communities that have been impacted by systemic racism. And I really like that Brian was covering the point of making sure that we are giving students the opportunity to have that visible support, and the importance of making sure that this support in education and transformation doesn't just occur from an orientation. As someone who is currently working with programs on campus to push for understanding the importance of diversity and inclusion individually and how they work together, it's really important that we carry this conversation and make it transform it in a way that it turns into the application phase and making sure that it isn't just a one-stop shop type of situation. And so, yes, I'd definitely like to see if the panelists are interested in discussing possible alternatives for involving marginalized communities. Earlier, I mentioned a bit about involving cultural organizations on campus that are underrepresented, offering space and engaging with said communities on campus to make sure that their voices and existence is real and prominent in these spaces. Vanessa, I know you're, not to call you out, but I know you're very involved with student conduct. And so I'm more curious as, have you had opportunities in the past to interact with communities on campus and different student groups to make sure that their voices are valued and involved in the process of creating conduct policy?
I mean, one of the groups that we involve generally is our university student judiciary. I mean, that's our go-to student volunteers. There's about 100 of them in our that apply through a rigorous process, and they serve on hearing boards. So they're kind of the first line that we go to get feedback. We have an executive board that they share a lot of insight, but then we also, each staff member advises a different group of students within the university student judiciary. And so those are very diverse makeup of students from different majors, different, racial, ethnical backgrounds. Everybody's kind of from all over. And so that's the first group that we tap typically, because they speak from both student leadership perspectives and student involvement and just being students on campus, as well as from the policy framework that they're trained and understand. So that's kind of the first group that we tap. I know, Suad, you and I have talked briefly, before this presentation about the emotional labor of students in this process and creating change, and how we tap our students to provide their experience and share with us their traumas and all of the challenges that they've faced, and how do we as a university make it better. I think we also have to go outside of that a little bit and invest the resources to bring in the experts, right? Having not just relying on students to tell us what's wrong with our policies, but bringing in external reviewers to say, here's some of the problems that we've seen. One of the areas that we did, we started to reach out to one of the master's level programs for organizational policy. And so having them really analyze our policies and talking about some of the language that we're using, or how do we frame things. So tapping, not just students, but tapping different resources on campus. Nicole and I have done, tried to continue to bridge our campus partnerships, and not all students want to interact with the Office of Student Conduct, so it's kind of difficult sometimes for us to get that outside perspective, because we're scary, right? Like we're not a fun office that everybody wants. We're like, no, I'd like to stay away from student conduct as much as possible. And we get that, but also realizing that we want to, our values and our core mission in our office is to educate our student population. And so needing that perspective as well. But I really think investing the resources to not always put that emotional labor on our students to share their trauma and perspective in those conversations about creating policy change is important. And how do we, and if we do ask them to be a part of that, how do we compensate that? So, you know, making sure that we are not overusing the same students, because I think we all have our go-tos, right? Our USJ folks, but making sure we're getting a lot of different perspective. Yeah, just I think we as staff members need to not be afraid to reach out to groups that maybe don't look at us in a positive light. Those are actually the groups that we should be talking to. The groups that have had negative interactions with us, or that have been, you know, maybe sanctioned by our office, and talking about their experiences. One of the things that we did was developed an assessment survey for all students going through our process to assess learning through the process. So students are able to provide feedback in that way about how our process is or isn't educating students. And so that's a really important value added. So assessment and data is also really crucial to that. So I'm not sure if that specifically answered the question. I rambled.
And I think I want to take this one away from here. So I think that like a main point with this is that just like also keeping in mind that these marginalized communities and populations shouldn't be in charge of like expanding support for themselves. So at the Diamondback, something that we try to do is go to people and not like have them come to us for something. So an example is like last year, which is a blur. So sometime last year, we spoke with a lot of cultural groups, and we tried to just like find out which stories we've missed in the past and what we can do better in the future. And of course, we weren't expecting them to come to us and write an email and say, hey, like this happened, you guys like should be covering it, or X, Y, and Z. But instead, we were trying to figure out how we can best serve those populations that we haven't served in the best light, or as well as we should have in the past. And in addition, I guess another initiative that the Equity Committee has been working on is developing a reporting guide, just so that people can, you know, do the best practices that already should be in place. So for example, like one of the first things that people should do when they interview someone is ask their pronouns. That sounds like it's given, but it really isn't. So that's a small thing that, you know, that we're including. But the point is that like we can't always extract like the stories from people, especially minorities, and kind of like exploit it into a story, make it seem like it's more of a big deal than it is to the student, just because that is their trauma. Sometimes it's just something that they've already forgotten, that some journalists, even professional journalists, kind of paint in like a very horrible light. And I'm sure you guys have like read some things, even from like the Washington Post or the New York Times, have been like, how did this really like get published? But yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
I will add though too that I think is very important, as we do with the community. I have, you know, the community, sometimes they feel that we are a big elephant, a big ivory tower, so we're not coming here. So it's up to us for us to identify community leaders who are the movers and shakers, not just to be elected, but they are individuals that know the community and they are willing to work with you if you're looking forward to work with getting them involved. So I think is a process for the institution, in this case for campus leaders and people like us, to start identifying and expanding that table. Right now, we're talking about the Black and brown communities, but now we have the Asian communities being impacted today, because it has been impacted for a long time, but now is the topic of discussion. And I think it's important that we all have to bring all these issues, because at the end of the day, it's kind of the similar themes. We're all put it in one bucket, that we're all the same. I remember when I came to the United States, everybody started asking me about tacos. And I'm like, what am I talking about tacos? Because you must be Mexican and you must be Maria. And say, no, I don't have anything against with the name Maria, nothing against with Mexico, but I'm from Venezuela, my name is Gloria. So we have these issues that we had to kind of look around and bringing people to the conversation and making those relationships. So I'm sorry that you're going through all this, but that is the challenge that many of us are facing in institutions where perhaps the resources might not be in place. Perhaps there are so many other things that bog down their head that this is not important, but it's important to so many students. But you keep beating the pound the path so somebody will check up and then do something about it. But I think it's important and critical that we all start building. I tell my friends, you have to start making friends that don't look like you, and do it. I'm not the only one. I don't say, oh, I know Gloria and that's it. No, you need to know more Glorias out there, because that is the only way that you can expand the conversation and understand what is going on. You see what is happening at the borders. At the borders right now is not because they wanted to create some tension around here. These are families, that kids that they don't have anything to live for. And the only way is to find a place where resources are supposed to be in abundance. And we are all privileged here. We're all privileged of having a home, having food to eat and all of that. But there are many people that are suffering. So how do we expand that conversation to see what is it that our own students might be thinking about those communities, maybe impacted what they see at the news, and how do we bring those conversations? And is anything that we can do as a community to support those efforts to minimize the pain that these people are going through?
And I just wanted to add that, so for the Diamondback, I'm sure that some of you guys have saw, but I covered one of the student demands, Demand 24 specifically, that dealt with the implementation of evaluations regarding diversity and inclusion. So another thing that I wanted to add is that for this story, I didn't interview that many students. And that's because I shouldn't have to exploit their experiences to do this coverage. So what I did instead, I looked at other universities in this large country where we can always look and see what other people are doing in other universities and institutions. And I saw institutions that implemented similar things. And I just wanted to say, we don't always have to go to students to also even hear what the problems are. We can look at our neighbors and our other institutions to see what they have done to improve the culture at their respective institution or colleges as well. And I spoke with someone from Tulane who talked to me about how they implemented a lot of evaluations, or their course evaluations, that were very explicit. And it was the product of a lot of problems and a lot of students complaining, but it came about at the end of the day.
Thank you so much, Anaya, for that point, and Gloria and Vanessa for sharing points on the importance of making sure that we're building relationships with marginalized communities on campus and in the area as well. Very big focus on the Lakeland community and Langley Park, and focusing on making sure that we are reaching out as organizations, as opposed to having people with forcing students to essentially wrap up their emotional trauma and racial trauma and trying to convert it into curriculum. And I think what Anaya just mentioned ties really closely to one of the questions from the audience made by Julie. And I apologize for any of the questions that I read earlier whose names I did not mention. But yes, the question is, making racial bias training mandatory for all students, faculty, staff, administrators, health professionals, and student organizations is one of the 25 demands listed by Black student leaders. What suggestions do you have for implementing this training? I think it's a good question too, to look at from the different perspectives that we have on this panelist, especially from the student perspective to faculty to administration and beyond.
I think that the most important thing is to make sure that this is ongoing, and that, that people, have this training periodically throughout, their time here, but also that we interweave this into everything that we do, right? So my worry is that we create some kind of a training that happens when folks get here, or during, there's some touch point, like we do a lot of other kinds of trainings, but this is not that, right? So we need to incorporate this training throughout our curricula, throughout our faculty and staff trainings, throughout everything that we do. It has to be completely baked into the pie, right? And so that's a huge lift. So it's not something that can be done very quickly, right? But we need to start wherever we can. So I would say whatever spaces we're in, whether we are in departments, whether we're in a classroom, whether we're in a student organization, wherever we are, that we do what we can to bring that training to that space. And so that we have diverse trainings, that we have different foci of the trainings, right? In lots of different areas in that we're in. So I think we all need to kind of start doing that in all of our spaces.
I'd also like to echo and take it in the direction of making sure that that racial bias training is very contextualized to specific spaces. I feel like from the way that the media portrays racial bias training and from some university standpoint, it's more of painted in this general overarching type model of racial bias on campus, as opposed to contextualizing it to the specific areas. So in the question, they mentioned the concept of looking at it from the approach of health professionals and students, organizations, and it's important that we don't use one particular type of lens in seeing what racial bias training looks like in those spaces, and making sure that it's important for us to involve multiple stakeholders in the creation of that racial bias training, but also making sure that it's understandable and in complete relevance to the spaces that it occurs in. And yes, definitely to make sure that it's embedded and constantly shown and represented in everything that we do. Naz definitely mentioned that point of making sure that we are putting racial bias training not as a one-time thing, but as something that is present and active and visible in these spaces.
And I just want to add that I appreciate, like, obviously racial bias is the focus of this particular, talk, and it's a huge component of bias, but also how are we weaving training in all areas of bias, right? In all of our protected classes and all of our, how are we teaching and training people to effectively hit all of those areas, whether it be accessibility, whether it be gender, whether it be race, whatever that looks like, but making sure that our ongoing trainings address all of those different areas.
Thank you, one and all. As you know, we understand and the white supremacist concept of time, we have to at least honor it to some degree for all of us as folks are going to meetings and classes. I did want to make sure we had left room and space for each of you to share kind of closing thoughts and making sure you can provide and impart with us kind of closing wisdom, resources, either things that we want to take away in the chat or verbally, things that we could then have the audience be able to take away from this next steps for them. So I wanted to invite Anaya first, if you want to share a little bit from your perspective, and then we'll rotate around.
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is just like, because it is so important to not just assume about things and to educate yourself so that other people don't have to do it for you. I would totally recommend anyone who hasn't already to read The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. It is a fairly old book, I think almost 100 years old now, but a lot of what it says and a lot of what he writes, it still applies to modern day. And I know the experiences of me and so many other Black students. So I would just like recommend that just so people can gain a little bit more empathy and probably challenge their assumptions too.
Gloria, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I just would like to say that, like I said, explore your area, explore not only on campus, but outside. It's a beautiful community and very rich of culture, impacted by social injustices. So this is a great place for us to listen, to understand, to have a level of empathy, as Anaya say. And it's so rewarding to have this type of connections that you are working in collaboration to find solutions to the impact that, particularly today with COVID, particularly today with this the race relation conversation that needs to get some actions. I'm here for actions. I'm getting tired of the dialogues and conversations. We wanted to find solutions and policies that really address anti-racism and all of those things. We are being eliminating racism. Basically, that's what we would like to do. So that's something that we're at the Office of Community Engagement. We're always looking for people like you that want to be rolling their sleeve, going out and meeting the wonderful community that's surrounding us and learning more on how we can tell their stories from our angle and from their angle. Thank you for having me here today.
Welcome, Gloria. Thank you. Naz, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I mean, echoing everything that everyone else said, I think, we all have our spheres of influence, right? So I think number one, taking responsibility, each and every one of us, to educate ourselves, continue in our ongoing lifelong learning, and then being able to enact whatever we can in whatever sphere of influence we have is so critically important. I also want to, we're talking a lot about racism. I also want to turn our eye towards white supremacy, right? So understanding white supremacy and how that impacts us and our thoughts and our behaviors, as well as everything that we do, all the systems around us, and really targeting that white supremacy in ourselves and in our systems. I don't know, I'm just going to leave it with that. Thank you so much, though. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you, Naz. Vanessa, would you like to carry us through?
I don't know if I can do it, but I'm going to try. I so value this conversation and being surrounded by these awesome colleagues, because change is slow and change is hard. And we have to keep fighting, and we have to keep using our voices to acknowledge and notice things that are wrong, and take the appropriate and necessary steps to change them. And that's a lot on us as faculty and staff, to make sure that we're, again, doing our homework and doing our work to look at our policies, look at how we do our work, and making sure that our students are represented in that process as best as we can. And I want to encourage our students not to give up. It's a frustrating process to bang down the door of white supremacy. It's a frustrating process to have to create change at such a large public institution, but please don't give up, and don't give up on us. We will continue to do the work. It takes longer than probably we all would like, but I can say from my office's standpoint, we are committed to doing the work, and I know so many of my colleagues are. So please don't give up, and please keep working with us to make those changes that we all need.
And lastly, Suad.
Thank you. I'd definitely love to take a second to encourage everyone to make sure that you are educating yourself and constantly trying to better yourself, to learn more about the experiences of the different communities in the area, and about the communities that are, whether they are inside of the spaces you inhabit or outside. I really would like to take it back to the concept of making sure that we are, as a university, building relationships with student groups on campus, especially cultural groups, because I feel like they have not received the attention and visibility that they deserve. And accessibility is a huge key factor in their visibility in general on campus, and making sure that the university is taking a proactive approach to reach out to these cultural groups without but making sure that reaching out is not aggressive or hostile or demanding, and making sure that their voices are heard, and making sure that students' contributions and emotional trauma and experiences with discrimination on campus and in their lives aren't being exploited in spaces to educate others, and finding ways and alternatives and getting creative to make sure that these students are receiving some form of compensation, and that they are being valued for the information and work that they put forth to bringing about that change.
Thank you, one and all. Nicole.
I'm so moved to be with all of you and to learn from all of you. And I want to say thank you deeply for your time and your expertise and your wisdom and sharing your thoughts and your vulnerability as well. Thank you so much for all of our guests for joining. I want to share a few quick resources. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the trauma that hate speech and bias has caused, and will continue to cause as we continue this challenging work. So I just put a link in the chat, and Alex is sharing the screen. We've compiled numerous resources from around campus, as well as local and national resources about education, number one, about diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as support resources for those who've been impacted. So please take the time, share this as far and wide as you would like. This is for everyone. It's got the link to submit a proposal to Senate, the Piscataway Convoy Tribe website that we discussed earlier, numerous different pieces. So feel free to use this. If you have things that you'd like to add, go ahead. But thank you. Just so much gratitude from all of us, and to our students on the panel and moderators. We appreciate you both so much, Anaya and Suad, and just everyone who's been involved. So thank you.
Hope you can find some peace and centering today and every day. Thank you, one and all.